Yeah, so kind of talk about that because obviously you're a Christian and you love the Lord.
Yep.
Praise Jesus. First off, I guess there's two questions. One is, what is your filter when you're choosing a fantasy, right? Like,
Mm.
obviously we should have filters with music and movies. What's your filter with books? And the second question is, do you view as some fantasy as demonic, or can it be demonic? And have you ever ran into like really weird spiritual, like it just kind of get rubbed you the wrong way, so you stop reading it? Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Sip&Awe, where God puts the awe in awesome. I'm your host, Brandon Windsor, and this is part El Dose with my buddy Emmayi King. Today, we talk about various subjects, but probably one of my favorite things that we talk about is it bad to read quote-unquote secular books? Because a lot of Christians have their opinions about listening to secular music, watching movies that aren't Christian. And so when it comes to books, when it comes to stories, what is our filter? What should be our filter? And of course, that can be a separate conviction level, but just because you don't have a conviction about it doesn't mean it's right. I hope that makes sense. And so I'm really excited for you guys to tune into this episode. I'm really excited to get into that with Emmayi. But the biggest announcement that I have, ladies and gentlemen, May 17th, mark your calendars, Sip&Awe Live is happening in Shreveport, Louisiana at Rhino Coffee. It'll be a free event, but donations are accepted. You guys can donate and give in the links below. You can now like and subscribe on YouTube, and please listen to Sip&Awe on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. You guys got your cup of coffees? Are you ready for this episode? All right, let's get in there and let's meet my buddy Emmayi King. And we are back. Welcome, Emmayi, to episode Dose.
Howdy. It's been roughly 3 or 4 days, right?
Yep, it's actually, yeah. At this rate, I started to post Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. So yeah, it's been a few days since we last talked to each other via 5 minutes. But hey, everyone, put your
Yes.
glasses in the air. It is time for Sippy. Here we go. 3, 2, 1. Thank you, Lord, for the day that He has made for you and me. 1, 2, 3. Yeah. So last episode, you were talking about you have a coworker who would use humor because he was insecure.
Hmm.
That was me, man. I remember in high school, oh my gosh, I would be quirky, I would be stupid, I'd be fun, and like I was the class clown, and I enjoyed it, and I loved the attention. And yet on the inside, I was so depressed because my life at home wasn't really the best during that season. And I remember I had a friend where I kind of sat down, I talked to her, it's like, hey, just to let you know, I'm kind of depressed. And she was like, "Really? I would have never known. You're so happy and so fun." And I'm like, "Yeah, I use humor to cover it up."
Mhm.
Um, and so when I came to Go Ministries, I met Charles, and I finally saw someone who used humor as a genuine, quirky, that's his personality, and
Mhm.
was really fun.
He
And
also uses it as a very effective tool.
yeah. And so like, um, that really ministered to me, his humor and his insecurity, and it kind of helped me be a little bit more of myself.
Mhm.
And even now, I'm still pretty quirky. I'm still pretty sarcastic, and I have kind of had to tone it down with the sarcasm, especially at church, because, um, I'm the leader of our young adults group, and some of the people just don't get it. And
Mhm.
someone actually thought that I was sarcastically upset with someone. Then they actually thought that I was upset, so I had to just tone it down, and
Ooh.
I can't be sarcastic with them. So mental note, it's like, don't joke with them.
Right.
Uh, but what's funny is my wife is a little bit more accepting of the fact that I'm quirky. Um, Not as much as public, because we would go out in public and I would be a diptard, bro. I would just say the craziest things, and it would make her genuinely upset. And I'm like, I'm so
Mm.
sorry. But now she's a little bit more accepting. She is quirky with me as well, which is fun.
Mhm.
But her humor is not as quirky, so it's a sweet balance. It's really, really nice.
Right.
So what about you and your wife? Would you consider yourself pretty quirky, or
I would say I am.
okay?
I do a lot of silly things. So I do this. This is fun for me. You may or may not do this, but I don't think you do. Whenever a situation is genuinely surprising or only mildly like, oh, this thing happened, I scream like a baby goat.
No, I do not do that.
Just very quietly, I go, ah! And it is so funny because people get caught so off guard, and at this point, it's habit for me. That's my immediate and natural response to that. And so I did this yesterday at work, and I was in the break room, and one of the ladies in the break room just like she was looking this way, and she goes and just stared me down. Like, why'd you do that? It's like because it's fun, not bad.
That's so funny. I could
It is great.
imagine whenever your wife tells you that she's pregnant and that's your reaction. Yeah, man, that's awesome.
Yeah,
What
maybe.
speaking of that, are you guys wanting children pretty soon or you're gonna wait for a while?
We haven't talked about it again recently. When we first got married, we were saying something about 5 years.
Right. How long has it been? Three, two
We're in
years?
June 26th, we'll hit our third.
What?
Yeah.
Wow. That's crazy.
We
That
got
was
married in
almost
21. It's 24 now.
that's crazy. That was almost 3 years ago.
Yeah.
Man, that's nuts. That's nutso. Yeah, I think about too, like our first year was almost 5 years ago. Or was it 5 years ago?
It began 5 years ago in September.
Dude, that is nuts. I'm not gonna like start talking as if we're old, but it's just crazy how fast time flies, man. Like
Yeah. The
it kind of
passage of
hit
time is
me
insane.
because sorry, my foot got stuck in my chair. 1 second. Oh my gosh.
You're
Okay.
good.
That kind of hurt. So I remember I logged in my Snapchat not too long ago and I
Mm.
saw a worship rehearsal video from 4 years ago. And I was like, hold up. Are you telling me that I've been doing worship at SEC for 4 years? Like, what is going on? And so that kind of sparked my oh, we got a cat. What meow what's his name? Emu?
Yumi.
Yumi. What does Yumi mean?
It's Japanese and it means abundance, beauty, or arrow, like from a bow. But I
Whoa.
liked it because it came from a book from an author that I like.
Nice. What book is it? You like books. You're a book reader, aren't you?
I am at this point I'm a book hearer. I mostly listen to audiobooks because at my work I can listen to them.
Cool.
And I work 40 hours a week, and so I can get through a lot of books in that time.
Nice.
Um, the book is called Yumi and the Nightmare Painter by Brandon Sanderson. It's a
Cool.
cute little love story. It's set in his wider fantasy universe, which was cool.
That's cool. A New Year's resolution that I have now is I want to read more books because
Okay.
I had a bad habit our first year in Go Ministries where I would start spiritual books or I would start any book and a week later I wouldn't finish it. And
Mhm.
so that kind of happened in our marriage too. Uh, not our marriage, mine and my wife's marriage,
Yes,
obviously, because
precisely.
we're
Our marriage is fine.
gosh. Anyways, so I would start a book and I would get to chapter one and it was great. And then I would never get to chapter two. And so
Mm.
I have a bookshelf behind me. If you guys are watching on YouTube, there it is right there. And I was going through all the books I started my first year, and the first chapter is just covered with notes and highlights and all that stuff. Chapter two is not even touched. And I was like, bro, here's my New Year's resolution. One, I'm going to start reading, and two, I'm going to finish each book that I start. Um,
Okay.
yeah, so I read Holy Spirit by Michael Koulianos. It was really, really good. And now I'm on The Triumphant Church by Kenneth E. Hagan because I started that our first
Okay.
year and I never finished it. So, really
Fair.
good book.
Also started it and didn't finish it, if I'm not mistaken. That or it was like the Bible in Light of Our Redemption that I started, and I was like, wow, this is dense. Not dense as in bad, but dense as in there's a lot here. And then
Yeah,
I stopped reading it.
for sure. What kind of books do you like? What
Mainly, I read
genre?
fantasy.
Okay,
I read a lot of fantasy books. So I've read almost everything within the fantasy published works of Brandon Sanderson.
cool.
Um, Very good books. If you like fantasy, they're awesome. I've started reading the Wheel of Time series by Robert Jordan. Also good.
Cool.
I'm only on the third book of that though, so I can't recommend the whole series yet
Yeah.
because I haven't finished.
Right. Yeah. So kind of talk about that because obviously you're a Christian and you love the Lord.
Yep.
Praise Jesus. First off, I guess there's two questions. One is what is your filter when you're choosing a fantasy, right? Like
Mm.
Obviously, we should have filters with music and movies. What's your filter with books? And the second question is, do you view as some fantasy as demonic, or can it be demonic? And have you ever ran into like really weird spiritual, like it just kind of get rubbed you the wrong way, so you stop reading it?
Not for me because I immediately recognize their fantasy. However, like they're 100% fiction.
Mhm.
However, sometimes like there's a book series I read in high school that it was entirely based on this like whole angels, demons, and other supernatural entities thing. And I read it and I was like, oh yeah, none of this is biblically accurate. Like this is all stupid. But
Yeah.
um I wouldn't recommend it to anyone. Like it was well written, they were good books, but just because that might have been the foundation that God had been building on me my whole life.
Mhm.
And so with good conscience, I couldn't just be like, hey, you go read it unless I knew like the person individually. And then point I would tell them my thoughts on the series and then let them choose.
Yeah.
When it comes to picking a new book, um, I typically go by what has been recommended by a lot of people, and then I avoid books with certain traits that prevail. There is one really good fantasy series that I like, and I'm waiting on the third book of, that has a significant chunk of it that I absolutely detest.
Mhm.
Um, Only because your main character is like 16, and so it's the whole like he's worldly and he's coming of age, so
Mhm.
he's having a bunch of sex, and it's like, no, leave me alone with this. I'm here for the fantasy.
Yeah.
Get out of here with this.
Yeah.
Um, but otherwise, what I do when I pick books or shows or movies or anything like that is I look through and I find what it does and doesn't have in terms of explicit content, in terms of like sex and sexuality is one of the main ones I avoid because I have
Mhm.
a history with pornography and I'm not really trying to tempt that back in.
Mhm.
And so most of the books I avoid those.
Yeah,
Um, and that's as for demonic and such, it's one of those you have to trust the Holy Spirit.
for sure.
Um, because, for example, um, I didn't read the books, but I liked the movies of the Harry Potter movies,
Mhm.
and they're just a classic fantasy good v evil. A lot of people get hung up on the idea that it's Hogwarts is the school of witchcraft and wizardry, and then they applied our biblical definitions to those words instead of the definitions that those words are using, which is just magic.
Yeah.
Um, because they're decent books. Uh, they're well loved by their readers, and they are well written. And the movies are also fun, and it's a classic good v evil story. Now, some people could see those and become inspired to pursue witchcraft and wizardry, which is why I don't typically recommend them. And I don't always go around saying like, "Oh yeah, I've watched those; they're great." I say, "Oh yeah, I've watched them; they're good movies,
Yeah,
but not like good stories."
for sure. So you touched on you filter sexuality and sex out because of pornography.
Hmm.
As a Christian, why do you think it's important? Because this podcast is for believers and non-believers. Why do you think it's important to
Right.
filter out certain things? Why should people do
Mm.
that?
Um, the immediate explanation was a chemistry explanation. And I'll spare you the science.
Okay.
But I think it's important for people to filter out certain things because what we struggle with in our history, it's not that we're not free of them, but it's kind of like allergies or lactose intolerance. At that point, you know that that has a specific effect on you. And so for me and unnecessary sex and sexuality in terms of explicit content, I spent a good amount of time addicted to porn and or just constantly making the choices to pursue porn. And so for me, it's not something that I want to be like, oh yes, I have a tendency towards this thing. Let me just hang out around it.
Yeah.
And so when it comes to making tendencies, I was listening to a leadership podcast talking about decisions. And one of
Hey guys, I wanted to stop real quick and say thank you so much for tuning into this episode. I want to challenge you with something. If you know someone in your life that you know that they would like this episode, stop what you're doing and send it their way so that we can keep growing the Sip&Awe family. All right, thank you for sharing, and let's get back to the episode.
is make it automatic for one, and I think it might have been last year at Champions, or it was something that Chip's niece, I forget her name at the moment. I think it's Kylie something.
Yeah, Kylie. Yeah.
Uh, said is in terms of making a habit less appealing is you have to make it inconvenient or keep it away from yourself.
Mhm.
And because I already have that ability or so quote unquote that mental muscle memory for that type of content, I keep it far away
Yeah.
because I know how it affects me.
Yeah. That's important, man. That's a really cool analogy. I've never thought about it like that before. Um, so do you believe that you can totally be set free from pornography, or do you think like right now, as Emmayi lives his life, there is that um, in your brain the desire, and if you were to see that picture, or if you were to read that story that uh, gets graphic, it would spark that desire again, and you'd fall into pornography, or do you think it's completely
I
gone?
So in terms of, I'm fully free,
Okay.
100% fully free. I really liked what Charles said in his, where when God was talking to him that night, if the book is really the book and it says what it says it is, and that is true, regardless of whether or not you believe it, what does that mean? And Charles said, well, it means I'm free and that I'm responsible.
Yeah.
Um, in that who the sun set free is free indeed. And so they're all just the rest choices.
Hmm.
Um, but I think in general it falls under like muscle memory just because you stop doing something and you're spiritually free. The Your nervous system is really cool in how it builds muscle memory.
Hmm.
And along those lines, if you start to give it the proper stimulus, that muscle memory works.
Hmm.
And so if you are used to thinking about one thing a certain way a lot of the time, your brain, because it wants to make an efficient use of all your energy, will then make it easy to think about that thing.
Yeah.
And so what you do is you work on removing that, but you also don't constantly put yourself in the place where you were.
Yeah. Totally. I was listening to this guy talk about pornography, and he was saying the root of pornography actually isn't lust. The root of it's loneliness, and that's why a lot of men do it. Um,
Mm.
do you think that you watch pornography because it was a lust issue, or because it was a loneliness issue, or was it totally something different?
It was a sensuality issue. For me, in general, this is one of the things I've struggled with a good amount.
Mhm.
I say struggled with because that's just our terminology. It's one of the things I dealt with a good amount.
Yeah.
Is I mainly, like a person, only really want to do what I want to do, and that is a really bad way to live your life.
Hmm.
So wanting to pursue only what tastes good, only what feels good, only what seems fun, and that is not a great way to grow, and it's not a great way to mature.
Hmm.
And so for me, it was just something that felt good, and so
Hmm.
I pursued it from that aspect. Not in the like I'm compensating for loneliness, not in that I actually viewed women that way. It was just something I did because it felt good.
Yeah. Did pornography skew your relationship with your wife, or did it pervert the way you looked at your wife?
It did not pervert the way I look at her. The effect that it has had has been tangible in other ways. Um, like it made it not necessarily harder to open up, but harder to be vulnerable at first.
Hmm.
Um, and then in coming together, it was a lot rougher. Um, I'd be more closed off, so to say.
Yeah, for sure. Did your Was your wife aware of your pornography issue uh while it was happening, or did you kind of like you got set free and then you're like, hey, just let you know, like this was an issue, and
She was aware
so
while it was happening.
okay, it's, it's powerful because I kind of struggle with that too, you know.
Mhm.
Um,
Because what happened in my scenario was the Holy Spirit's awesome and he'll tell you what you need to do and what you need to know. It's
exactly.
really the best part is that he's patient enough to keep telling you and you're like, no, I'm not doing that.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times when we try and heal, um, we want to get right in private and then only talk about the victory side of it. But
Mm,
the other thing is we're meant to do life together and
mhm.
in community. And so if you're only trying to get better alone, it's not really going to work.
Wow.
And so it was one of those things where I needed my wife's help and I needed her support and I at least needed her to know
Hmm.
because I unto myself within my power I can unwrite a habit. It's just way easier if I'm the only person keeping myself accountable to me to be like, yeah, I can just make an allowance here, or I can hide this information here, stuff like that.
Yeah,
And
man.
so, getting a community in it for me, a large part of that is my wife,
Hmm.
um, and just being like, hey, this is what I'm dealing with. The best part is um, my wife is awesome. Wasn't like she wasn't any version of mad. She's like, okay, then let's deal with this, which is amazing because I was concerned that she would be mad,
Hmm.
and reasonably so. But
Hmm.
I remember hearing someone else talk about, it and they're like, it's not like they're like, I love you. It's not an issue of that. If this keeps coming up, like if it's like every, I think Tim Ross said this, But if it's every other week, it's like I looked at porn, I looked at porn, I looked at porn. It's like that's showing that you're really not growing. And at
Yeah,
that point, they might get mad at you.
for sure.
So,
Yeah, that's kind of cool that you say that because I read this book in my senior year, and it was the book is Every Young Man's Battle, and it was talking about pornography and lust and all that
mm,
stuff. And he was talking about don't beat yourself up. Like, there's grace in the sense of if you watch pornography every single day, like multiple times a day. Let's just say you watch it 4 times a day, and then
mm,
next week you watch it once a day. That's growth. Not saying it's
hmm,
good and you should watch porn, but that's growth. And then you do it
right,
once every other week. That's growth. And I think that is good and powerful. But I think when there is no accountability and you're your own accountability partner, you can just kind of let those things slide. Of like,
hmm.
I'm just gonna let it slide, like the book said. Like I don't do it
I'm
every other
growing,
day. Right, I'm growing, and I haven't watched it in a few weeks. I'm just gonna let it pass. And it's like, no, like tell somebody. Like don't allow the devil to, and don't allow
right,
yourself to do those things anymore. And so that's why accountability is so important,
hmm,
and that's why your wife being your accountability is huge, and you being your wife's accountability was something that she's struggling with, because that's what
hmm,
marriage is. And I love what Tim Ross said. He talked about how the person that you married is what you know at that point. And so,
hmm,
I've learned that. So when I moved in with my wife, I saw some things that she would do, not bad. Okay, not like I'm not talking anything negative, but some
of
habits that she
course,
would have, and the way that she would do things, and then she saw the way that I would do things, and so we're
hmm,
learning and we're progressively growing, and it's a learning process. I've never seen my wife be a mom before, and so whenever we have a baby, that's something that
hmm,
we're going to grow in together. We've never been parents before, right? And
right,
so we've never dealt with punishing our child together. And of course, I think there should be
right,
some conversation before you have a kid. But it's
absolutely,
like,
just planning and such like that.
yeah, but it's like there's going to be some things that we didn't talk about that like kind of just come out of the blue that our kid did. And I might think it's like, yeah, it's hey, it's going to happen. But she's like totally just going off the rails of like, you're
Right,
not going
because you
to,
see different sides.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So it's like, first off, communication is key, and two, accountability is powerful.
Mhm. Can I
And
chat on that for a
yeah,
second?
absolutely. Go ahead.
Okay, so this is something that I've been learning, especially throughout marriage in general, and I don't claim to be an expert. My 3 years in, I'm not about to go host a seminar. Um, but it's something that I've noticed in our relationship. And in general, I've heard it said from many decent sources that your strengths complement each other's.
Hmm.
So, like, I might have strengths where she has a weakness and that type of thing. And she has strengths where I have weaknesses. I can assure you that. And so, for me, it's one of those things where I, in particular, am really, really good at staying very, very
Hmm.
calm. I am pretty unfaceable in terms of whatever happens in life.
Yeah.
Um, and when we first got married, my wife was not this way. Not as like a discredit to her. She was pretty good at it.
Yeah.
Um, and so tense situations come up, and I'm just chilling, like, which unfortunately gave off the appearance that I didn't care about it. It's like, no, no, I care. There's not much that's actually within my power to do, and so I'm not going to worry. Um, and so there are certain aspects of our marriage that I've at least observed where there are things that I am really good at, and I can teach her how I learned that, and there are things that she is really good at that I want to learn.
Yeah.
For example, my wife has been in children's ministry since she was 12.
Hmm.
Um, so she's 10 years in.
Hmm.
I have been in kids ministry for a good chunk. I started at 12, but not the same level. And then there was a good amount of time where I wasn't, that she still was. And so she is very, very good at talking to children,
Yeah.
and very good at talking to them in a way that they can understand and they still listen.
Hmm.
And that is something that I am growing in because we both teach our class. And so I want to make sure that the students walk away not only from her lesson, but also from my lessons, that they heard and they have at least one point that they can take and grow on.
Totally.
And so that's something that she's skilled in that I'm working to learn. And
Yeah.
so when you're talking about your wife's strengths and your strengths, and you notice different habits and things, is that we are different people. But if we work together and communicate well, like you said, those strengths can add to each other, and then you can manage things and at a supernatural level instead of just you two and your natural strength.
For sure. Because and if you don't, you can start resenting your wife. It's like, man, my
Right.
wife is really good at that. And it really bothers me. Um,
Mhm.
Mac Hammond, who Pastor Steve Munns used to work for, he's a
Mhm.
pastor out in Minnesota. He said this about his wife, and it was powerful. It really opened up my eyes to marriage. And so he said that whenever they were growing up, him and his wife were, they got married at a young age. He would view things in a very natural sense,
Mm.
and then his wife was super spiritual. So he was
Mhm.
really natural, more than spiritual. So she would come in and she would balance him out. She's like, no, this is what the Bible says about this and all that stuff. Versus his wife was super spiritual with things, like a little bit over spiritual, and he was
Okay.
really natural. So he would come in. And he's like, no, like, hey, that's not what, like, dial it back. You don't got to make
Mhm.
everything a little bit spiritual, okay? And it was really cool to watch them and hear about how they balance each other out in the sense of their spirituality. Wait, what's that
Mhm.
word?
Spirituality.
Spirituality. Sorry, my brain like
You're good.
stopped. My brain stopped braining. Spirituality and their natural, the natural world. It was really powerful, and so, um, yeah. What's kind of, this might sound weird, but I had this revelation that my wife loves photography. Okay,
Mm.
and a musician that I used to really, really, really love. I still like him, but I don't listen to him as much anymore. His name is Paul McCartney. He used to be in the Beatles.
Okay.
He's, in my opinion, one of the greatest songwriters to ever live. Anyways,
Mm.
his first wife was a photographer, and she
Mm.
captured so many cool pictures of Paul in his early days. And I had this revelation of, was like, because I used to be super gung ho, like my wife has to be worship leader, and if she's not my wife. And it's like whenever I met Esther, like I was like kind of struggling with, like, but she doesn't sing, you know. And then like our first few months of like talking, it's like, no, like she loves photography and like she can balance me out, and like she doesn't have to be this, I don't know, this cookie cutter individual. Now I'm not saying that's not bad,
Right.
because you can have preferences and all that stuff, but it's
Right.
like her value is who she is and what she likes. And so I should be able to uh let her be herself in every aspect of her life. And so ever since then I've been totally just like in love with who my wife is, and she's great. She's the
Mhm.
best, and she definitely balances me out in the sense of she's more relaxed and I'm more quirky, and so she balances me out of like, hey,
Mhm.
maybe don't be quirky right now, and I'm like, right on, I totally understand. And so marriage is awesome, and so
It is.
I love that you talked about that. But we're gonna close out this second episode. Amaye, thank you for tuning.
Absolutely.
I was gonna tell you thanks for tuning in, but you're not tuning in. You're here. But thanks for
I
being on
am
the
here.
show.
I might
Yes.
listen to it anyway.
Hey, that's what I do. I listen to the episodes that I make. Um,
Mhm.
some of the views on my YouTube page are from me. So, but guys, thank you for tuning in to Sip&Awe. You can now listen on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, and you can now get some merch. The link will be in the description below. But don't you worry, Amaye is coming back for one more episode, and so we will see you guys next week.